Today we'll do a quiz on the use of prostaglandins in cardiac patients. So this would specifically be directed towards neonates. So first question, how does PGE1 act? What is the mechanism of action of PGE1? Second question is, why does it need a continuous infusion? Why is it that you can't give prostaglandin by bolus? Why do you have to infuse it? So what is the mechanism of action of prostaglandin? Anyone? Mechanism of action of prostaglandin? Okay, so you've answered relaxation of ductal smooth muscle, which is true, but when someone asks you mechanism of action, then you need to talk about increase in cyclic AMP. What is the actual mechanism? So cyclic AMP is increased, this leads to muscle relaxation. So it's a potent vasodilator. It relaxes the smooth muscle tissue in ductus arteriosus as well as pulmonary artery. Actually, it even relaxes it in the systemic circuit, which is why you can get a drop in blood pressure. So it's very rapidly metabolized in the lungs, and that's why you need a continuous infusion. So whenever you give prostaglandin, the lungs will metabolize it very quickly. And so a continuous infusion is needed if it has to be effective. Okay. Next question. Name some cyanotic lesions, low QP situations where prostaglandin E1 is used. So blue baby with low pulmonary blood flow, cyanotic baby. Name some lesions where prostaglandin E1 is used. So you've given an answer: tricuspid atresia, pulmonary atresia with intact septum, neonatal Epstein's with pulmonary atresia. More common than that, so important to think of anything which is duct dependent. So pulmonary atresia, critical pulmonary stenosis, right? Okay, tricuspid atresia, severe tetralogy of Fallot. There you have a very blue baby with top, and then Epstein's anomaly. So these are the lesions where you would use prostaglandin in the neonatal period: pulmonary atresia, critical PS, tetralogy severe, any triatresia, and Epstein's anomaly where you've got functional pulmonary atresia. Okay, so moving on from that, name some cardiac lesions where you would use prostaglandin where there's a low cardiac output. So where the patient presents with poor perfusion. Any cardiac lesion where you'd use prostaglandin in the neonatal period where they present with poor perfusion. Okay, we have some answers. Coarct, interruption aortic arch, hypoplastic left heart, critical AS. That's right. So any left heart lesions, essentially, the systemic flow is dependent upon the duct. So coarct, interruption, hypoplastic left heart, and critical AS. These four lesions. You can see a picture here of a coarct and then of a hypoplastic left heart. So in a duct-dependent systemic flow situation, if the PDA closes, patient will present essentially with poor perfusion and shock. So low cardiac output. Now name a mixing lesion where prostaglandin E1 is used. So the third category where prostaglandin E1. So one category is low QP, one category is low QS. Third is a mixing lesion where you need to have prostaglandin. And can you name that? Okay. So mixing lesion where you need prostaglandin E1 is transposition of the great arteries with intact ventricular septum. Now obstructed infradiaphragmatic TAPVC to the ductus venosus is another indication for prostaglandin, but it's not a mixing lesion. It would come under your, well, to some extent, but it comes under your obstructive lesion. In that sense, it's still a right heart, left heart lesion because the pulmonary veins are obstructed. But when you talk about pure mixing lesion, then PJ with intact septum, typically they'll be blue and they'll have no murmur. Now, do you know any other indication for prostaglandin E1 infusion in infants? So we've talked about low QP situations like severe tetralogy of Fallot, pulmonary atresia situation, Epstein, We talked about low cardiac output, like left heart obstruction presenting with poor perfusion. Third indication is a mixing lesion like transposition with intact IVS. One unusual indication is obstructed intradiaphragmatic TAPVC with the ductus venosus. That is the only TAPVC where you can actually use prostaglandin. Otherwise, it is contraindicated in all other TAPVCs. Any other indication you know for the use of prostaglandin in infancy, apart from these lesions? Maybe not, it's not a commonly used indication, but it's something you should remember, which is when you've got a TGA and let us say he's got a regressed left ventricle. And one of the options to make the left ventricle become high pressure and non-regress is to keep the duct open. So you give prostaglandin, open up the duct. When the duct is large, what happens? The pulmonary artery pressure becomes high and the LV becomes prepared. So this is one method that is used for preparation of the left ventricle in TGA. So one option is you can do stenting of the duct and medical stenting. You can do actual stenting and therefore keep the duct open, or you can use prostaglandin to keep the duct open. So I call it medical stenting. So you're actually getting the left ventricle prepared by keeping the duct open, and that increases your pulmonary artery pressure. Okay, so that is the fourth indication for the use of prostaglandin in infants. Now, when would you give prostaglandin E1 even before an echo? So in what clinical situation? You've not done an echo, but the baby has certain criteria that you meet that indicates prostaglandin E1. Okay, so that's right, neonate with shock and cyanosis. So either the very cyanotic newborn, right, or when the hyperoxy test is in doubt, so a cyanotic newborn, or a newborn with shock and heart failure, or if you find a pulse discrepancy. So essentially two categories for where you would use prostaglandin. Very blue babies or babies with poor perfusion. That's right. So we'll move on from that. So what are the determinants of successful treatment? So say you now have a baby, you started, say it was a hypoplastic left heart, you started prostaglandin. In which babies you think prostaglandin will work and which babies it's unlikely to work? What are your determinants of this? Can you mention some favorable factors and some unfavorable factors? So preterm, yes, because they don't have any, they're not going into spasm, but preterm it's a hard call to start prostaglandin because how long do you continue? So the favorable factors are that the postnatal age at the time when you started the infusion was less than 96 hours. So if it's a 2 or a 3-day-old baby, it's more likely to respond to prostaglandin than a 1-month-old. So younger age, and if the pre-infusion PaO2 was not bad. Now, the ones that are unfavorable is if your patient is already in extremis. He's got circulatory collapse or severe acidemia, or for some reason it's an irreversibly closed ductus, then those are unfavorable factors. Okay, good. Quickly, what is the dose of prostaglandin E1 and how quickly is it effective? So once you give prostaglandin E1, so we said there were 4 indications, right? But the first three were the most important ones: low QP, low QS, or mixing, TGA, intact septum. Once you give prostaglandin, how quickly is it effective? Is it 1 hour? Is it 12 hours? Is it 24 hours? Is it 48 hours? When do you expect to see a response? And what is the dose of prostaglandin? So 0.05 to 0.1 mic per kilo, okay, and then everyone is saying within 1 hour. So that's right, it's 0.05 to 0.2, you can really go up to 0.2, some people talk about 0.4 mics per kilo, but reasonable is 0.05 to 0.2 mics per kilo per minute. And in most infants, the ductus will reopen within 30 minutes to 2 hours after starting prostaglandin. So if after 2 hours your duct has not opened, there's no point going on and on and on. You want to wait till 3 hours, that's okay. But there's no point waiting 3 days if you're not having a response to it. Now, how do you do the dosing? You start at a higher dose. Once you get your desired effect, you taper it get to the lowest tolerated dose, and that becomes your maintenance dose. This is just a quick thing on how you mix it. I think you all know 0.6 into your weight will be number of milligrams in 100 ml. At 1 ml per hour, that's 0.1 mics per kilo per minute. Okay, next question. Okay, couple of practical aspects before that. You always give it in the ICU because of its side effects, which we'll discuss. You should have 2 IV lines. Why should you have 2 IV lines when you start prostaglandin? One IV line, the prostaglandin is going. Why do you need the other IV line? Is that what can prostaglandin do? Okay, one, you don't want to flush the line because you can get apnea if you give too much of a dose. Second is giving prostaglandin. Remember what we discussed in the beginning: cyclic AMP, relaxation. Sometimes it can cause hypotension. You need another line to be able to quickly give fluids if that happens. So always 2 IV lines. You prepare it under sterile conditions in 5 or 10% dextrose or normal saline. It should be specially prepared. You have to discard it if it's more than 24 hours. And that's why prostaglandin, once you start, it's a little expensive one because it has to be continued. And as we said, you have to give it by continuous infusion because it's metabolized in the lungs. So it very quickly leaves your system and gets metabolized. Now, once you start prostaglandin, how do you know that prostaglandin is working? What are the parameters that you have started the prostaglandin in your ICU? Okay, one is fast improved. What else? So we said that there were 3 different indications. One was patient with low pulmonary blood flow, like severe tetralogy, pulmonary atresia, Epstein. So in them, stats should improve. Second criteria was a patient who had left heart obstruction, low cardiac output. In him, you expect his urine output to improve. What else do you expect to improve in that patient? His pulses should improve, his perfusion should improve, right? Similarly, in a TGA patient, he is not having mixing. If now he has mixing, his acidosis should improve. What else apart from this? So these are all good. There's one more thing you can use to see what is happening, right? What do we guys use? What machine? So one is going to be your pulse ox or your ABG, right? An echo, right? You can look at your echo. So when you start prostaglandin, you first look at the echo, look at the size, look at the gradient. Then you start prostaglandin. Then you look at the size again, look at the gradient again. If the size has become bigger and the gradient has become less, that means that duct has opened up. Okay, and that you can do within 1 to 2 hours. So you start prostaglandin at 3 in the afternoon, go back and re-echo in 1 or 2 hours. So pulse ox or ABG, in the ABG, typically what will happen is that the CO2 values will rise by 20 to 30 millimeters. If you don't want to do ABG, look at the stat. It should improve to 80 to 85%. And as we discussed in the left heart obstructive one, you should get correction of acidosis, improvement in cap refill, improvement in BP, and improvement in your urine output. And finally, assess the duct for patency by echo. And since the prostaglandin acts within 30 minutes to 2 hours, all this should be reassessed within 2 hours. So let us say at 2 hours, patient has still got a saturation of 60, or he's still acidotic. You look at the echo, duct hasn't opened. Then you have to reevaluate whether it makes sense to continue on it. Now, once you've started prostaglandin, what is the maximum duration it can be used for? How long can you continue? We said earlier in the class that prostaglandin needed to be given by continuous infusion because it is metabolized in the lung, right? Okay, so, but how long can you effectively give it for? Okay, 48 to 72 hours, 1 week, any other answers? What do you know the maximum time that prostaglandin has been given anywhere in the world? Maximum? So it's been given for up to 140 days. So if somebody asks you maximum duration, you should really say ideally it should be used until the patient goes for his surgical or his catheter intervention, right? Say the patient is septic and you can't go in 42 hours. or 48 hours or 72 hours. You're going to continue till the patient becomes okay. You want to get to the lowest dose and use it for the shortest time. But having said that, therapy up to 140 days have been reported. And do you know in which kind of patients that has been done? Where they've given therapy for 140 days. 140 days is essentially what? 4 months. Do you know which kind of patients, which university center, where is this done? So TGA, why would you wait TGA 4 months on prostaglandin? Right, in a TGA situation, you're going to switch in or you're going to do a stenting. So this is essentially been used in patients with hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Well, medical stenting, okay, we talked about why you keep the duct open to prepare the left ventricle. But typically, how soon does a left ventricle get prepared after you either stent the duct or give prostaglandin? Within how much time? Typically, how long would you wait? Say you have a 2-month-old, you give prostaglandin. By the way, medical stenting is my term, so don't use it. It's essentially, instead of a stainless steel stent, you're using prostaglandin to open up the duct to prepare the LV. Typically, within 5 to 7 days, actually 2 to 3 days, the left ventricle should get prepared. So in a TGA, you would give it for 2-3 days, prepare the LV and do the switch, or give it for 2 days till the patient becomes hemodynamically stable, acidosis improves, and do the switch. In situations of hypoplastic left heart, where they've been put on the transplant list, one Loma Linda University in the US, they used to keep them on prostaglandin for weeks and months until they could get a heart for them. So that is one indication of long-term use of prostaglandin. Now we talk about prostaglandin. Can you name some side effects? And let's start with the immediate side effects of prostaglandin. Okay, apnea, and then I'd like you to also add how you would treat the patient if they developed apnea. You give prostaglandin, patient becomes apneic, what would you do? Okay, diarrhea, flushing. What else? Apnea, hypotension, fever, thrombocytopenia. Okay, good. Okay, if you got apnea, how would you treat that patient? Can you name, what would you do? And can you name a drug you would use? Aminophylline, that's right. So if you got apnea, you can use aminophylline. Of course, you're going to immediately ventilate, yes. And if you can't ventilate, at least bag and mask them. So first bag and mask for intubate, and you can use aminophylline in those situations. So some of the side effects of prostaglandin, one is the cardiac, and this is very important to remember hypotension. Flushing, okay, it's okay, he's flushed. Bradycardia, hypotension and cardiac arrest. You see 1% of patients develop cardiac arrest. So when you get hypotensive, what do? If patient is on prostaglandin, now his blood pressure drops. What do? On hypertension, he's on prostaglandin, you started it, 10 minutes later his blood pressure dropped. What are you going to do? So you're going to immediately stop the prostaglandin, give him fluid, then restart the prostaglandin at a much lower dose. In those patients, you'll want to start at a low dose and gradually go up. We said that prostaglandin is rapidly acting, right? Within half an hour to 2 hours, you know the effect. So whenever you start prostaglandin in your ICU, you need to be there. Start the prostaglandin, look for all this. Typically, if they get hypertensive, it will be in the first half an hour to 1 hour. Why do they get hypertensive? Because it's a systemic vasodilator. Okay. Also reported are weird things like shock, SVT, VT, but that's much rarer. I think you need to remember flushing and hypertension. Now, from a neurologic standpoint, apnea. Look at the incidence of apnea. 12%. So 12 out of every 100 kids is going to get apnea. Fever is something to remember. You know, many times we start prostaglandin in the ICU. Then they get a fever. Then we say now they're infected. Now we can't take them to the OR. So fever can be a side effect of the prostaglandin itself. So if the baby didn't have fever before and he has fever now, send off your cultures, give a day of antibiotics and take them up. You make sure you rule out infection, but keep in mind that yes, prostaglandin can also cause fever. Third thing we discussed mainly is apnea. And apnea again typically occurs within the first hour. So that is why the importance of when you start prostaglandin, being in the ICU in that first hour, looking for one is the positive effects of prostaglandin, two is the side effects. Does he get hypertensive? Does he get apneic? If he gets apneic, immediately bag and mask, ventilate, and you can also give a minosylin. Remember, in smaller kids, they are anyway like preterm babies. The respiratory centers are not well developed, or small babies. They are more prone for apnea. So weight less than 2 kilos, they have a higher incidence of apnea. Wheezing, tachypnea, another side effect, and a few others like hematologic. So when you get asked this in your exam, please divide it up. Cardiac, neurologic, hematologic. They can get anemia, thrombocytopenia, DIC, renal like anuria, hematuria, renal failure, and so on. Metabolic like hypokalemia, hyperkalemia, and so on. Okay. Now let me ask you, what are the long-term side effects? What are the long-term side effects? So say, oops, sorry, I don't know what I did. One second. Hold on 1 second, I seem to have, okay. So what are the long-term side effects of prostaglandin? Anyone? So when you give prostaglandin, let's say for a few days or actually few weeks, okay, tissue friability is one, that's right. What else? So one is tissue friability. So what does that tissue friability do? That actually affects your surgeon. If he goes in to close it, he may actually cause bleeding. You may have a lot of bleeding. Putting sutures through it is many times difficult, right? So that is one side effect. Any other side effect, guys? Long-term side effects of prostaglandin. If a patient is on prostaglandin for weeks, I told you maximum reported is 140 days on prostaglandin. Of course, in India, we don't give it for that long because of cost, and we generally, and ICU stay cost, we generally take a decision much faster. So other side effects, and you need to know this. What if your patient on prostaglandin, let us say he was he's a severe tetralogy, and you started prostaglandin. Now you surgeon says, look, he's only 2 kilos, please get him to 2.5 kilos. And you are on prostaglandin for 3 weeks. Or a pulmonary atresia intact septum, you opened his valve, but his RV is not great. You're keeping him on prostaglandin for 3-4 weeks, till his RV becomes thinner. Now this patient starts vomiting. What do you think of? What do you think of? What is HPOS? HP. What is HPOS? These guys kill me with the short form. HPOS. Oh, pyloric stenosis. Okay, that's right. So you think of pyloric stenosis. So some of the long-term side effects of prostaglandin, one of them is that you can actually get a ductal aneurysm. The whole thing weakens, and you get a lot of fragility of the ductal and the juxtaductal structure. So you're at risk of rupture. Second side effect is hyperostosis. That means there's proliferation of the long bones following long-term infusion. Incidence as high as 50 to 60%. So if you start seeing that the bones are all getting thicker and fatter, that's a side effect of prostaglandin, hyperostosis. Third side effect is gastric outlet obstruction. You need to remember this. Patient on prostaglandin for long term and they start vomiting, he could have developed gastric outlet obstruction. And so that is why you typically, don't keep the recommended dose is that, within 120 hours, 4-5 days, figure out what you're doing and try and wean them off the prostaglandin. But these are the 3 major long-term side effects of prostaglandin dosage. Okay, next question. Patient, you started him on prostaglandin. Now patient actually gets worse. What lesions do you suspect? So we talked about in the beginning that in blue babies with low stats, or in babies who have low perfusion, you can start prostaglandin without an echo. Now patient got worse, that's right. So one of the lesions you're going to think of is obstructive CAPVC, absolutely. Exception, as we discussed, is TAPVC going to ductus venosus, which is quite rare. So all other TAPVCs get worse. Any other lesion apart from TAPVC you think of? Patient is getting worse. You haven't done an echo. Outside hospital calls you, doctor, I started prostaglandin and now he's even worse. His perfusion has gotten worse, everything has gotten worse. So you say it could be an obstructive TAPVC, and he says, I'm looking at an echo, I know how to tell pulmy veins are okay. So another lesion you have to think of is some kind of obstruction involving the left atrium, right? Because what is happening essentially, blood is coming back to the left heart, right, when you open your duct. Okay, that's portoiditum, but of course that's quite rare, but yes. So let's say you have hypoplastic left heart. You start prostaglandin. Patient gets worse. It could be that he's got a restrictive foramen ovale. So blood is now coming back to the left atrium, but it's not able to go out from there. So you're actually causing further back pressure on your lungs. So situations where you would start prostaglandin, but now they're getting worse, would be things like hypoplastic left heart with a restrictive foramen ovale, any form that way of mitral atresia with a restrictive foramen ovale, TJ intact IVS with a restrictive foramen ovale. You see, we always talk about prostaglandin being used in transposition of the gate-graded vessels with an intact IVS, right? That is the third lesion I gave you in the beginning. And what does prostaglandin do? It increases the blood going from now aorta is blue blood, right, to pulmonary artery. That blood comes back where? To left atrium. Now that left atrial blood is pink blood. That pink blood must go out through the ASD, through the RV and out through the aorta. So if you've got a TJ with an ASD who's blue, when you open his duct, he will have the mixing. The circuit will be there and he will become pink. But let's say he doesn't have an ASD or he has a very tight PFO. What will happen? Blue blood will go through duct, come to pulmonary artery, get oxygenated, come to left atrium. But there's nowhere for the blood to go. It goes back to LV, goes back to pulmonary artery. So you're actually increasing your QP, but you're not increasing your mixing. And so that patient can actually get worse. So in any TJ intact septum, when you start prostaglandin, you should check also on the status of the ASD. At least it should be a 4 mm, 4.5 mm, some kind of ASD for mixing to occur. If there's no ASD or a 1 mm ASD, you will be worried that he may get worse, and so you should be prepared if he doesn't get better or if he's getting worse, that you will start what? A septostomy or send him rapidly for a switch. So these are the situations where you start prostaglandin and they get worse. Think of obstructive TAPVC, yes, and think of situations where you have a restrictive foramen ovale, so you're increasing your LA blood, but you are not actually affecting change with the prostaglandin. Now the reason portoiditum doesn't come into that is typically they won't present with low cardiac output. They're not duct dependent necessarily. They may have pulmonary venous obstruction. So the cases you would be starting would be where they're duct dependent. You increase duct flow and now the blood is getting stuck either at the pulmonary vein level or at the left atrial level. Okay, all clear on this? What about failure to respond? You've started prostaglandin, nothing's happened. We said that once you start prostaglandin, you should see a response within half an hour to 2 hours. The response could be improving saturation or improving perfusion, and you should look on echo and see that the duct opens. So, okay. So, one option is that the duct was closed. Okay. 2 option, inadequate dose, but typically you would start at a high dose, right? And then come down. So, if you started at 0.1 mics per kilo, you may want to go up a bit, but let's say nothing still happens. So your options are, one is that your diagnosis was not right. So you need to look at your diagnosis. 2 is there's something called an unresponsive duct, that even though the duct is there, it's just not responding in spite of giving an adequate dose. And 3rd is a situation where the duct is absent. Typically, we said that the favorable outcome of prostaglandin is when you give it in infants less than 96 hours of age, right? So the duct should open. So even if you didn't have duct flow, duct should open. But there are some situations where you have an absent duct, there's no duct at all. So that's another situation where they don't respond. Okay. Now, any alternative? So we talked about prostaglandin. Do you know any alternative to prostaglandin E1 that can open up to IV prostaglandin E1? Any alternative to IV prostaglandin E1? Okay, atropine. Anything else? So that's good. Atropine is something you all should know of. Atropine and adenosine, interestingly, they have been experimentally demonstrated to cause vasodilation of the duct. So, but it's not really clinically used. But if you're in a desperate situation, like let's say the patient is in some place half an hour away, 40 minutes away, they don't have prostaglandin, you can at least give atropine, give another atropine in 15 minutes for whatever it's worth if the patient is in extremis. So that is one. There is also, by the way, oral prostaglandin available. You should all read up about it. And duct patency up to 8 weeks has been reported using oral prostaglandin. Not available in India, but available if you practice outside. So remember oral prostaglandin, and remember adenosine and atropine. They're of course very short acting. See, the difference between adenosine or atropine and prosta is you can give prostaglandin by continuous infusion, whereas we don't really have a continuous infusion for adenosine and atropine. Stenting, yes, stenting of the duct can be done, as we discussed, if you want to prepare the left ventricle. In that situation, sometimes in a tetralogy, there you want to buy some time. So certainly that's something to consider. Okay. So I think I will end with that. That prostaglandin has essentially really changed the outcome for children with serious cardiac malformation. You need a preoperative thorough evaluation, though in situations where the baby is blue or the cardiac output is poor, you can start prostaglandin without doing an echo. And really the idea of giving prostaglandin is to make them clinically stable and then be able to operate or do your CAS procedure with a baby who's not acidotic, who's not hypotensive, who's not got saturations in the system.